parents, the child goes to the teacher who will guide that child.
What do you mean by external moral authority? You use that expression a lot.
Materialism has to do with when you are
Hello, welcome back to the course in Values and Spirituality. We are currently on page 95 of book 1. I have in the studio with me Sister Denise, who has been kind enough to take us through what she meant by the text as well as the meaning behind her words. Sister Denise, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So, when it comes to the subject of UNESCO's Commission on Education, the first part that grabbed me is the way you started off this paragraph. Around the world, governments and educationalists are trying to balance the needs of the individual with the needs of society. I must admit, when I read this line, I realized this is an almost impossible task.
Constantly having to be balanced, but it's really the society wants to use the individuals to enrich itself, and the individual wants to enrich him or herself in the context of society. So it's a bit of a competition.
Yes. You go on to say that ideally the two support each other, but in practice they are often at odds.
Because it's a competition.
I would like you to give us as much information as possible on the following. In today's increasingly materialistic world, a form of spiritual illiteracy has developed, resulting in abuses of human rights and degeneration of values. What do you mean by spiritual illiteracy?
You know, we talked earlier about people being in survival, because the circumstances of the world are such that for many people it is a very hostile environment. And the unemployment rates are extremely high. It's very, very competitive. And so a person will revert to motivations which imply that you will get what you need at any cost, and it doesn't matter who you have to tread on to get what you need. And so what that means, that the finer feelings, the refinements of spirit, qualities of love, respect, regard, all of this have to be placed in a secondary position, and the person is just trying to get what they want and what they need. So wants and needs are combined, and a person will justify violence, illegal activities and so on the grounds that, well, if I don't have it, I can't survive.
What do you mean when you say a cogent and enduring society requires strength of character in the majority of its members for social cohesion and happiness and health at the individual level? A cogent and enduring society. I like those words.
The problem is that our society, the society we're living in at the moment, is breaking up or breaking down. Much of the infrastructure is breaking down. Health services are breaking down. Education is also breaking down. And so we're wanting to have a cogent and enduring society, but what we have is one that's breaking down. So we're at odds with these ideals, these educational ideals, and it puts a tremendous stress on the society itself and on the individual within that society. So it's very difficult to know what to do about it. My optimism lies with those young people who are not fazed by the collapse of the old, because they are so strongly feeling themselves to be part of something new that's coming up. And even I feel myself that I'm part of something new that's emerging, which allows me to not worry or be preoccupied about the collapse of old and enduring institutions. So it's difficult because we're in transition.
You then include what UNESCO had to say about education, and this reads as follows. UNESCO's International Commission on Education said that education is an indispensable asset because it strives for peace, freedom, and social justice. It is one of the principal means available to reduce poverty, exclusion, ignorance, oppression, and war.
One of the scenes that we see on the TV, if you look at news, is how the many wars that are going on involve the destruction of schools. And it's very, very difficult for people, young people in war zones, to get an education. So you have a whole generation of people who are deprived, and that's a very large number of people. The war has been traumatic. The deprivation has been definitely unjust and unfair. So I'm not quite sure how the world is going to look as these young people who grow up in war zones, who grow up as refugees, try to survive when they get to a point where they need to earn their living. So it's looking very difficult. And of course, education is a very good way to deal with prejudice and superstition and this sort of thing. But I think that the problems that the world is facing at the moment are new. Extreme climate events are new. People don't know what to do about it. Poorer countries which are experiencing multiple extreme climate events, like Haiti, for example, they're unable to pull through. And the world's resources are very, very stretched. So the impact of climate change and extreme weather events is something, I mean, very difficult to quantify, but it's definitely making things very difficult for a large number of people. And as I said before, the situation of being in survival is something new, which the philosophy of education hasn't really provided for. And I think UNESCO's Commission on Education is from a time before all of this was happening. And because the world is changing so much and very rapidly, all of this work that was done 20, 30 years ago doesn't have the relevance that it would be expected, because things are changing so quickly.
Your next line was very thought-provoking. The word critical mass came to mind. Research has shown that a very small percentage of the population is sufficient to affect the behavior of the rest. India's population is nearly 20% of the world's total, and India, united behind an inspiring vision of a better world and committed to universal values, could lead the way to a better world. I must say, I do applaud your optimism in the face of much evidence to the contrary.
I think at the moment I wouldn't specify a particular country or a particular culture. My optimism is really going to a demographic group that I perceive where people do not identify with a particular country or culture. They really feel I'm an international citizen, I'm a person of the world. I have friends who belong to all different cultures and races and mentalities, and it is this group that is beyond nationalism and beyond religious affiliation and so on that I am putting my bets on, because what is tearing the world apart is actually nationalism, competition, religious conflict. And I think that people who have gone beyond that have done so because their intuition says my humanity is more important than these other things which are divisive. Your humanity is a unifying characteristic, and the core spiritual values are part of that. And I am also optimistic because whenever something, goes into dissolution, that is followed by new growth. And so I'm seeing the seeds of new growth sprouting, which means that the dissolution of the old really functions as fertilizer. It's not something that you consider as bad, it's changed its form,
Let us now go on to core values, which is contained on page 96. I see that you start off there with the experiment, or study rather, done by Rushworth M. Kidder, the president of the Institute of Global Ethics and author of Shared Values for a Troubled World. I'd like to read this to the viewers because I think it's very relevant for the purposes of this discussion. A group of 160 high school students in Canada from different cultural backgrounds were given the following exercise. You are responsible for choosing 5 values that will be written above the door of a new high school. Everyone will be expected to behave according to those values. Within 10 minutes, the students had made a list of 75 values. Then in small groups, they extracted the 5 that they felt were most essential. The top scoring values were honesty, respect, equality, compassion, and acceptance. Kidder deduced that all of us have core values, not because of our religion, but because we are human. This is so inspiring and so beautiful. And what makes it even more beautiful is that it comes from children.
Innocent ones.
Yeah, they haven't been contaminated by the world. But it warms the cockles of the heart to read something like this.
It does indeed. But you see the values that seem to transcend a culture and religion and race and all of this, that are recognized in the children: honesty, respect, equality, compassion, and acceptance. It's very loving. And this is really the new growth that I'm seeing out of the ashes of the old. And I think that we should not be afraid of things falling apart, especially when we see these beautiful new things coming up, because humanity is very resilient. And in world history, there are times when a culture disappears and then another culture emerges. Maybe there are great civilizations in different places and they're not replaced by another great civilization in the same place, but the earth will, in a sense, give a different turn to a different area for a different civilization to emerge. And maybe we're at a time where a civilization is emerging that is not what we have now. Western civilization is fundamentally materialistic, and it is materialism that clearly has eroded our spiritual qualities. And these, top scoring values or qualities are definitely very pure, very spiritual, and a culture which is based on the inner spiritual qualities is absolutely right for what's next.
It's also very beautiful, and it just gives one hope for the future when one reads things like this. I must say that. The next part of the writing that caught my attention is Kidder spoke about the differences between human and animals, and I don't want to go into that, but what struck me was the following. Human beings have the capacity to act from their spirit. They will die for what they value. Take us through this.
It shows you that you are motivated not by base emotions. They come when you are spiritually depleted. But a person who has taken care of themselves and filled themselves spiritually, that gives meaning to their life. And this is why they would be willing to die for something that is higher than and more valuable than life itself.
Take us through what it means to act from your spirit.
Well, when you're acting from your spirit, it's put it this way: you can be minded, materially minded. You can be operating from your base emotions. You can be operating from a motivation of sense gratification. And this mode of operation takes place when people are spiritually depleted. Now, you fill a person up with their spiritual qualities, which is what meditation is about, and which is a very important component of this course, because it's values and spirituality. Spirituality means that you fill yourself from a source that's a divine source. As soon as you fill yourself from that, it changes your motivations, and instead of being motivated by base emotions, you're motivated by finer feelings, because that energy is there in a high degree. And so this is the change that needs to happen to enable people and inspire people to recognize that they're operating in a spiritually depleted state, and all they need to do is fill in order to live in a way that how they live and what they are spiritually corresponds exactly. And that's a serious change in what motivates human beings in what they do and what they say.
You end this paragraph on a lovely note. Spiritual values are the foundation of human character and behavior and are essential to the human capacity to reason morally. That sentence requires more than one reading for absorption.
Moral reasoning is a very important skill because you're prioritizing what is important and why. And if you are saying, well, I'm angry because somebody displeased me, therefore my gut reaction is to go and beat them up, and they justify it on the basis of their emotion, you see, there's no moral reasoning going on. It's just all gut reaction. You have somebody who feels the same emotion, someone offended them, it gives rise to a feeling of anger and aggression, but the awakened spirit within says, this is not going to resolve the problem satisfactorily, and so therefore we have to think about it differently. And you may arrive at the solution that, well, in this situation, it's best to just let it go. Or you may arrive at some other conclusion, I need to go through due process of the law, but you will not operate on the basis of just gut reaction.
Could you tell the viewer what you meant by the following? Ethical and spiritual values are universal and imperishable because they are metaphysical and stem from the human spirit. They promote the greatest good for the greatest number over a long period of time. This sounds very attractive. Very attractive. It sounds like an ideal state to be in. What I want to know is, how do we get to that condition from where we are at now?
You see, when you're spiritually depleted, it's not possible to care about others.
Wow, that's big. There are very few who know that.
You start filling yourself up with spiritual qualities, that starts to overflow, and this is what makes you human. The capacity to love. Love means to extend energy from you to another person for their benefit. Caring about what happens to others is a sign of your human greatness. But when a person is spiritually depleted, they can't do any of this, and they're functioning in a very different, much more primitive or reptilian manner. And so this is why the human spirit needs to be nurtured, because my perception of the problem of human suffering is that when the spirit is depleted, then the orientation of self-identification goes from spiritual to material. And then material values dominate. When you feel yourself spiritually, then spiritual values dominate. And that's your motivating factor.
We've discussed this in the past, but understanding something and implementing it is two different things. How does one give life to these words, these specific words, and what you just explained? How do you put it into your character in such a way that it works for you?
Something has to inspire you. And I think that inspiration comes from an external source, which corresponds to something within you. And when those two connect, then you have an extra energy that enables you to live for those qualities. Otherwise, if you don't have that energy, they're just words, you see. And to keep oneself inspired, to continue to inspire oneself, that is a very powerful kind of leadership. And I think a lot of people are looking for that kind of leadership in others. And I think that a person who studies these things and who practices spiritual development will start to fill, and they will start to be an inspiration for others.
That is exquisite. It really is so beautiful. You go on to say, some values may be more important than others at different times and in different circumstances, but all are of importance to being human. As well as being at the core of religious and philosophical concepts, spiritual values are shared by the world's people across cultures and generations. When I read this, I got the distinct impression that there are certain values that divide people, and then you get certain values that literally bring together all of humanity, just like Dr. Kidder spoke of in his experiment. And I think the world has become such a place that we focus more on our differences than our commonalities. And this is a lovely note on which to end the subject in core values.
Yeah, you see, core values are things that are to do with the human heart, what is essentially human. And sometimes a person can be inspired when they really question themselves. What am I? Who am I? What is the purpose of my life? And just to eat and sleep and consume and reproduce doesn't do it for a person. They want something with higher meaning, and it is these core values that give meaning to your life. And once you get a sense of meaning, then you can put your energy behind it. And the values that divide people, these are material values or some of the others that we've looked at. And it's because there are clashes of values also. But when you go to these core qualities, to me, the human spirit, the human soul, is essentially motivated by love, by peace, by personal power, by wisdom, and by purity, you see. And these are very subtle qualities and characteristics. But once you get hold of these, and once you start to fill yourself with these through your meditation, then everything starts to make sense.
Would you like to leave the viewer with a few last words before we say goodbye?
I think what I would suggest is, since you're in a course of study, take pencil and paper and write down what are your values. What are the core values that you see in yourself and that you'd like to have in your life? And maybe even if you get together with people in your family and people at your workplace and really take up this subject and ask people what's the most important value that they hold in highest estimation, and start to have conversations about this, because when you have conversations about things of this depth of meaning, it really changes the atmosphere and quality of your relationship with those people.
As you've just heard, she has given all of you some homework. I think it's one of the best homework you've ever received. What are your core values? What is most important to you? And once you've spent some time noting them down, I would leave you with another question. What stops you from putting these values into operation immediately? What's stopping you? I leave you with these questions, and I do hope that you'll find an answer that has some meaning for you. I wish to really thank our speaker.
Thank you.
For sharing her wisdom and her depth with us, and I do hope to see you soon for the next episode. Take care, and thank you for joining us today. Goodbye.